A few years ago, a professional colleague was interviewing for the presidency of one of our Lutheran colleges. Administration in higher education, if you've ever done it, is a hell all its own and not for the faint of heart. So when my acquaintance made it to the third round of interviews and the likelihood of him being selected as president had grown exponentially, he was trying ideas out with me and other people about how he might speak to the board. For almost 30 minutes, he waxed eloquent with me about the sort of president he would not be. He would not let the board run over him. He would not be cowed by major donors. He would not give in to pressure to downplay the Lutheran identity of the school. He would not abandon his academic career. He would not do a whole bunch of really good things not to do. But when he came up for air, I said, "It's easy to say what you won't do, but if you were president, what will you do?" Long pause, end of conversation. People preparing to marry typically imagine that no one has ever loved as they do, that their love will be enough to overcome any obstacle. As an old married lady, I tell you, I'm glad to be married, but it ain't easy. Part of my job as their pastor is to quickly disabuse them of the notion of true love. Love is nice, but it doesn't pay the bills. I found one way to ground hopelessly in love people by reminding them of the reality of the marriages they have already experienced. So I say, think about your parents' marriage. What did you admire? And what about your parents' marriage would you rather not replicate? It usually doesn't take long for couples to describe things they will not repeat. We will always talk things over and never let anger fester. Please don't laugh, Joan. It doesn't work that way. Or they say, my husband won't spend all weekend in front of the television the way my dad did. My wife won't hold a grudge for a week the way my mom did. And the longer they talk, the easier it becomes to identify all the things their parents did wrong. And for the parents who are still married, the kids start thinking, maybe they shouldn't be. So after they've identified all these points of tension, my next question is, and how will you prevent that from happening in your marriage? Long pause, end of conversation. It takes no brains at all to identify problems, to criticize lame leaders or marriages of which you are not a part. If all it takes to be a good leader is to be able to identify poor leadership, I will clearly be in the next Star Wars movie as the galaxy's supreme chancellor. If all it takes to be happily married is to know why other marriages falter, Time magazine would name our marriage the marriage of the year. Naming who we are not is easy. But who are we? Advent is often a disappointing season for Lutheran churchgoers. Target has been celebrating Christmas since the day before Halloween, and I spied some Valentine's Day cards when I was there yesterday. A friend had 5 Christmas parties to attend this week and admitted that she's about Christmased out. But in the church, Christmas is still 8 days away. We don't sing Christmas carols except 2 verses of Joy to the World, which is in fact an Advent hymn, so don't talk to me about Christmas carols. We don't read the story of the baby Jesus. Even next Sunday, December 24th, we will hold strong. It will be the 4th Sunday of Advent here until the sun goes down, and not a minute sooner. Excuse me, A stranger who might have wandered in to worship today would be wildly confused by the beautiful Christmas decorations and the not beautiful, not Christmas Bible story we read. Today we read about not being something. John writes, "There was a man sent from God, but it wasn't Jesus." The man in question, the man who wasn't Jesus, was John the Baptizer, a woolly rant of a man, unkempt, hirsute, bombastic. But his personality was electric. People could not get enough of this guy. Last week, we learned that all the people of Jerusalem and the surrounding territory ran to the River Jordan to be verbally abused by John and then drowned at his hand. Doesn't that just scream Christmas? But there must be a reason. The gospel writer John opens with the baptizing John instead of a bawling Jesus. There must be a reason for this decidedly unsentimental beginning of the story of Jesus. And the reason? John the baptizer was clear about who he was not. Rumors were circulating wildly in the first century. Rumors concerning enough to have reached the innermost circles of the religious elite. In today's text, the Pharisees send out their minions to determine whether John the Baptizer is merely an annoyance or DEFCON 1, the highest level of national alert. 4 times their polite queries were met with, "I am not. I am not the light. I am not the Messiah. I'm not Elijah. I'm not the prophet." And even later on at the end of the story, he says, "I am not even worthy." It was only after John the Baptizer was allowed to speak for himself that he answered in the affirmative. "Do you want to know who I am?" he said. "Here's who I am. I am a voice." John the Baptizer was not many things. He was one thing. He was a voice, a mouthpiece, a shout in the wilderness. God is coming. God is coming. Open the express lanes for our God. A friend with whom I share a common tendency to self-admiration told me that in difficult circumstances, she has taught herself to pray, "Oh God, remind me today that you are God and I am not." John the Baptizer was not God. Neither am I, nor are you. We are not many things. And though it might be amusing and entertaining to name what you will not do in your professional life or who you will not be in relationship with the people with whom you live, it is also important to know who you are not when you stand before God. When our lives are hard, when circumstances take an ugly turn, when the people we love no longer love us, when everything for which we have strived is slipping away, it is critical to know who you are not. You are not in charge. You are not to blame. You are not beyond forgiveness. You are not beyond being loved. You are not being tested. You are not alone. Mostly, you are not God. Most anything we fear about what God thinks about us is answered in the negative. When we stand before God, who loves us beyond imagining, we are none of the things that we fear. We are, like John, just one thing. We are a voice. That's all. A voice that cries out in the wilderness of brokenness and shame and disappointment and poverty. Don't worry. Christ is coming. Christ is coming soon.